Howdy folks, John here. Boxster 986 water pump replacement time. As the saying goes, time is money. Let's get started. Parts you're going to need for your Boxster 986 water pump replacement. Obviously, a new water pump. You're going to need a water pump gasket. I would also highly recommend when you're replacing the water pump to replace the thermostat. You're already in there, it's easy to get to, and you've already got all the coolant drained. These don't cost much, so it's a perfect time to replace that as well. You're going to have to replace the coolant because of course you have to drain it all out to get the water pump off. If you're not sure what's involved in draining coolant and doing a full coolant service on a Boxster 986, I've got a separate video on that process. I will link to it below in the description. Another good item to replace, or at least check at this time, is your auxiliary drive belt, because you have to pull it off to get the old water pump off and put the new one on. I also like drawing out how the serpentine belt is routed over all the pulleys. We're just inside the car here. This is behind the seats. I've got the seats folded forward and slid forward. And we've got the access cover removed. If you're not sure how to put your Boxster 986 into service mode and remove the front engine access cover, I've got a separate video on that. I will link to it below in the description. And we're just going to be removing the serpentine drive belt right now. So I just use a breaker bar for this. It's a 24mm socket, and you just have to get it on the nut of the tensioner pulley here, and you pull down to release the belt tension. Pull the belt off, don't get your fingers in anything. I should also mention a really important safety precaution is I've disconnected the battery, just on the weird off chance that somehow this thing might turn over. Quickly looking at the drive belt, you just want to look for any fraying along the edges. And if you kind of pull it back a little bit, none of the ribs are cracked or anything. And just go through it, make sure there's no rocks or anything stuck in any of the grooves. But this belt looks fine. So here's the water pump down here. It's held on with 7 10mm fasteners, and you can access 4 from the top here from inside the car, and then the other 3 you have to get underneath the car to get those out. And yes, you do have to jack your car up to get to this. If you're not sure how to do that on a 986 Boxster, I've got another video on that. I'll link to it below in the description. I'm just using a 1/4 inch with a 10mm long socket on it. I'll just get this one off. They're not on tight. At least they shouldn't be. Magilladon. I believe they're all the same length, but we'll check that out when I get them all out. So we're under the car right now. We're on the right side of the engine. Here is the thermostat, and here's the water pump. Now we've got the 4 bolts on the top of the water pump off, so we've just got to take the 3 on the bottom. So one up here, one here, and one back here. But to make this easier, I'm actually going to take the thermostat off now. Should also note, so I've got the big cooling hose off of the thermostat housing. This is going to the rad. And then I've got this kind of this octopus one that had to come off as well on the bottom of the water pump. So those are the only 2 hoses you have to remove. But of course, when you're draining the coolant, you have to actually remove more. I removed that side, and I also moved the 2 heater core hoses so I can make sure the heater core drains out. But we've got this out. Hopefully I can do this with one hand. So I've got the 4 screws out. Just got the bottom one here to take out. And there's our thermostat. And there's a gasket here that we're going to have to take off. There we go. Gonna have to inspect that, just make sure that's clean. Might have to take a razor blade around there. Just make sure you don't nick the aluminum. Just get off of some of that residue. And now I'm gonna get the pump off. I'll come back when it's off, but we've just got to take those 3 bolts off on the bottom side. Water pump is out. If by chance you've never had your water pump out on your 986, or the previous owner never did, the gasket will still be stuck in here because it actually goes behind this other part. You can see it's been trimmed off down there. I don't know if you can see that. And when you get the new gasket, you're going to have to cut that part off, but we'll look at that when we're examining the pump. And yeah, you just want to check the pump cavity there. Just make sure there's nothing worn out, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So inspect your old pump. Check the veins in it to see if any of them have been machined down. That's a telltale sign that the bearing is going inside and there was enough movement in the impeller here that it was actually rubbing against the inside of the pump housing. And on Boxsters, water pumps are essentially a scheduled maintenance item. They seem to go anywhere between 50 and 60,000 miles, or 80,000 to 100,000 kilometers. I just follow a 10-year service life on them. But of course, if you drive the car more, every 50, 60,000 miles, 80 to 100,000 kilometers. When you buy your new pump, make sure you get one with the plastic impeller. Don't get the one with the metal. There's some aftermarket ones with metal. And what happens if the bearing in those start failing and there's movement, the metal fins will actually shave down the inside of your coolant housing in the engine. You don't want that. And yeah, this one was still fine. The bearing is still good. There was no leaking or anything. That's another sign. When you're underneath the car doing oil changes or whatever, always check the water pump. If you see any coolant coming, kind of dripping down, if it's dried up or whatever, the seal is probably shot and you've got seepage coming through the bearing and your pump's going to cave in fairly short order. As far as the bolts go, I thought they were all the same length. They're not. There's two longer ones, and the two longer ones go where the location sleeves are. So I'm going to mark on the new pump right now where those location sleeves are, so I know which ones get the long bolts. And the only other thing we have to do at this point is this gasket. As I had mentioned, there's part of it that's not used when you do a water pump replacement, and that's this section here. You have to trim these three little tabs off. There. So it'll just be going on the new one, and you don't use any sealant or anything. This metal gasket, it compresses and there's a coating on it that seals fine, so you don't mess around with any RTV or anything. So installation is the reverse process. And as far as the thermostat goes, same size bolts on all of it. They're different, of course, than the water pump, so just make sure you don't get those messed up. Just inspect your new one compared to your old one. Just make sure they're the same. And again, torque is specific, 10 Newton meters only. Easy to strip these out if you go much more. So 10 Newton meters. And when you're torquing the pump down, just follow a cross pattern when you're torquing it, just so you're evening out the torque. You're not just going all the way around. And probably same with the thermostat housing. I'd probably go corner, 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 corner. So everything's buttoned back up underneath. Water pump's in. New thermostat is in. Got all the hoses clamped up. And there's the top of the water pump from inside the car. All the fasteners are torqued up to 10 Newton meters. Another thing I should have mentioned to do is when you've got the belt off, rotate everything to make sure it's smooth. And look what we found here. Bearing shot in that idler. So I'm gonna have to pull that out. Son of a gun, listen to this. Crusty old bearing. That's why you check stuff like this. A lot easier to find it and fix it now when everything's apart. So, got to order probably might just be able to order the bearing, press it out, press it back in. Otherwise, I'll have to get a whole new idler. But other than that, replacing the water pump and the thermostat, as you saw, is pretty straightforward. Just got to fill the coolant back up, burp it, check for leaks, all that good stuff. Again, if you're not sure what's involved in doing a coolant service on one of these cars, I'll fire the link in the description for the coolant change maintenance. Thanks for watching, folks. Have fun replacing your water pump, and we'll see you next time.